The lawn is a very important part of the landscape. Our turf grasses are very important because if we think about it, whenever it rains, if we didn't have these in place, it'd be really muddy. We'd be tracking that mud into our homes, and even when it's dry, it'd be dusty all the time. With the wind we have, the dust would be blowing around. So it's really important to have a turf grass in the landscape. They do add a lot of enjoyment and aesthetics, beauty to our grounds. Well, today on the program, I'd like to take some time and talk about some of the turf grass varieties that are suitable for Oklahoma. And we've asked Dr. Dennis Martin, one of our OSU turf grass specialists, to give us some of that information. Hey, Dennis, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be on the show again.
Good to have you. Well, Dennis, I'd like to first talk about some of the different turf grass varieties that are great for the full sun areas, and then maybe we'll finish up with some of those great for the shade. And I know out in the sun in Oklahoma, Bermuda grass is probably the most common turf that we'll see.
That's right. It is the most widely used turf grass in Oklahoma, and there are no shade tolerant types, of course, available yet, so we do want to emphasize full sun only. There's two main groupings of the Bermuda grasses, the common Bermuda grasses and the hybrid Bermuda grasses. By far, most lawns in Oklahoma are going to be comprised of common Bermuda grass, and many times that's sold to the consumer as U3 Bermuda grass. There's actually several types sold as U3.
Okay. And we have some U3?
Yes, we do have here. It's a good overall performer. This same grass will go on new housing starts, also roadsides, and it gets used on fairways and tee boxes as well. So it's actually adapted over quite a range of cutting heights.
Okay, and it's a little bit different than the regular common Bermuda grass in that it's is a little finer, maybe a little bit narrower blades.
The better of the U3s will be a little bit finer in texture, but there is quite a bit of variation out there in the trade in U3s that are sold. It is available only vegetatively, though, not as seed.
Okay. Well, with Bermuda grass, there are obviously some advantages and disadvantages, and what would be some of those, Dennis?
Okay. The advantages of Bermuda grass are that it's fairly water use efficient, fairly drought hardy. Not meaning it won't go brown in a drought, but that it can survive as dormant crowns and rhizomes, so that when it does rain again, it will come back out of the drought and survive, which is saying quite a bit for an Oklahoma drought.
Yeah.
But it will have a little bit of thinning in the density of the stand, so that's to be expected. But it actually is a good xeriscaping plant as turf grasses go.
Okay. And as far as traffic, I guess it's one of the best for athletic fields and just
that's right,
playing on the lawn and that kind of thing.
Yes, because it's stoloniferous growth habit. It's above ground runners. It has the ability to grow if you will provide moisture and nutrients for it when you're trying to either grow it in or recover from traffic, and that is as long as it's in a bright sunny spot.
Okay. I guess some of the disadvantages would be that it's kind of aggressive.
That's right. You can't have rapid recovery without having an aggressive plant material. So gardens and ornamental beds, it can be invasive, and you do have to edge those very regularly or provide barriers to keep it out of those sites.
Okay. Well, as far as maintenance, doesn't really take a lot of maintenance, but if you do a few things to it, it'll look a lot better. Is that right?
That's right. The maintenance is really the consumer's choice. You can have very high quality turf with fairly intensive management, or you can have a moderate quality lawn with actually fairly low maintenance. It all depends on your willingness to irrigate, how much fertility you want, and as a result of that, the mowing that will be involved, frequency and height.
Okay, all right. And with some of the hybrid varieties, they're created with, I guess, the African Bermuda grass, like we've got right over here?
That's right. For a very short period of time, African Bermuda grass was in the trade in Oklahoma, but it didn't work out real well, so we don't suggest its use actually as a lawn, but it is used as a parent in creating the hybrid. And the hybrid's created by crossing African Bermuda grass with common Bermuda grass, and that creates a number of different hybrids. Those hybrids have included things like Tiff Way, Tiff Green, Midlawn, Midfield, Mid-Iron, all of those, and Patriot, our new release, all of those are examples of hybrid Bermuda grasses.
Okay. And I guess some people may be thinking, well, African Bermuda grass may imply that it comes from Africa and the other Bermuda grass maybe comes from somewhere else, but generally all of the Bermuda grasses come from Africa
That's
continent
right.
of
They
Africa.
originate in Africa and Asia, up into northeast China even, for the more winter hardy types. So quite a range of geographical adaptation.
All right. And as far as being viable from seed, there's an interesting thing about the Bermuda grasses there with the seed and flowering.
Right. All Bermuda grasses are going to flower, but just because you see a flower on a Bermuda grass plant doesn't mean that it will produce viable seed. Most of the hybrids are truly sterile and will not produce seed, but just because it is flowering doesn't mean you're going to be able to harvest seed off of it. And many of the common Bermudas that were brought into Oklahoma about a century ago, even though they would flower and they aren't technically sterile, they don't produce a lot of seed as well.
Okay, but it spreads by those
That's
below
correct.
ground stems, above ground stems.
It has, and it's naturalized over much of the state now.
It's going to cover a great area. Okay, with some of the hybrid Bermuda grasses, some of the best ones, you mentioned Patriot is.
Patriot is a new, rapid spreading, very dark green, fine textured hybrid that's used in high traffic areas. It's a wonderful landscape grass, but I will caution folks that it will be very aggressive into flower beds and gardens because it is a rapid spreading type.
Okay. Well, Dennis, which other sun tolerant turf grasses would you like to talk about next?
Okay, well, just to finish off the Bermuda grasses, there are seeded types depending on what the consumer wants. They could pick a good seeded type like our new Riviera that's now available in the trade. Also, Sahara is available widely around the state. Sometimes it does have some winter hardiness issues that Riviera doesn't have, but in terms of a bargain at cost and just suitable common Bermuda grass, Sahara will suffice as a seeded.
Okay. Well, how about we shift gears and talk about a different species of turf
Sure.
grass? How about the zoysia grass? Because that's another popular turf grass for the full sun areas.
Yes, let's move on to zoysia grass. I will point out that in our alleyways, this is actually Matrella zoysia grass. It's one of two species that's in the trade in Oklahoma. Just variety not stated, Matrella zoysia grass. Kind of a medium to medium fine textured zoysia. Tolerates low mowing from 3/8 of an inch on up to 1.25 inches. The Korean lawn grass species is what Meyer Z52 is an example of as a variety. And there are 11 sod producers of Meyer in Oklahoma, so you will be able to find sod or plugs of Meyer quite readily. And there are 2 producers of the Matrella zoysia grass.
Okay. Well, I generally think about zoysia as a turf being a little bit more coarse than your average Bermuda, but and kind of like this here, a little bit wider blade. But we look over here and we've got another zoysia that's very fine. But
That's right.
there's a great deal, or there's a little bit of difference in some things that we need to think about between the coarser zoysia and the fine zoysia.
Yes, certainly. And unlike Bermudas, there's actually 3 to 4 different zoysia species out there in the U.S., but only a couple of them actually make it commercially into Oklahoma. But you will occasionally find in some landscapes in the eastern part of the state some very fine textured zoysias. Usually that's emerald zoysia, which was sold for a period of time but no longer commercially produced in Oklahoma. But if you come across the zoysia lawn and you wonder what it is, most often it's going to be Meyer Z52 because that was the one that was planted most extensively and still is available. And it's a medium to medium fine texture, not quite as fine as emerald.
Okay.
There are new types that are out there. El Toro is one I'd like to mention that is an aggressive zoysia, and it is not your old-fashioned slow-spreading zoysia where you put some plugs out and wait 2 years for it to fill in. El Toro will spread in rapidly that first growing season, and that's what's great about it. And with a rapid spreading zoysia, the grower won't have to sell it for quite as high of a price because they'll get more cutting cycles off of it. So that'll help the consumer price-wise as well.
Okay, and zoysia is typically a little bit more expensive.
Yes, it
sod-wise.
is. It is considered more of an elite turf grass. It is adapted to full sun, to a very light shade. I will point out that it's not as shade tolerant as what tall fescues are, but if Bermuda's persisting but thinned in a light shade, it actually might be better to put some zoysia in there. The zoysias are very heat tolerant, and while they are more water use efficient than tall fescue, they still consume more water than Bermuda grass. So from a bare bones water efficiency standpoint, Bermuda grass will still be a better choice.
Okay, and the zoysia with this course of texture here would be mowed maybe a little taller than Bermuda, or does
Yes,
that matter?
you could. Actually, one of the problems that consumers have with zoysia sometimes is it gets puffy and they find that they're scalping it. And that's because they actually don't have a reel type mower when that's what's required for the real fine textured ones. But as you opt for something like El Toro that's a coarser, more open type, your standard rotary mower actually is quite well suited for mowing that. So you can mow it at 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. Sometimes we come across a 3-inch tall zoysia stand, and while some folks may like that, that's normally not the height we would recommend. We're recommending about 1.5 inches on zoysia to 1.25 inches.
Okay, all right. Any other things you'd like to tell us about zoysia turf?
Zoysia is a nutrient efficient turf, and it doesn't require as much fertilizer as Bermuda to achieve its ultimate quality. And they can deliver equal amounts of quality. Zoysias also don't require quite as much mowing, and there's many that are quite winter hardy. But in the worst of Oklahoma droughts, it's still going to be the Bermuda grass that predominates over zoysia grass if you don't have access to water.
Okay, and as far as the aggressiveness, I know a lot of people think, well, zoysia is not quite as aggressive as Bermuda, but
right.
That's true
It is for certainly mire, which is what most people's experience with is in zoysia. El Toro is going to give some of the common Bermuda grasses a run for their money in terms of spread rate. But again, we'll emphasize watch out around those flower beds and
keep them edged and weed eated.
That's right.
Okay. Well, right here we've got a patch of buffalo grass, and buffalo grass, of course, is native to Oklahoma. Native
Yes, it
to
is.
Sort of the short grass prairie areas. And I know there's a little bit of thought out there that buffalo grass is sort of the wonder grass. That'll take the place of everything and be well suited to every landscape and every situation, but not necessarily the case.
Right. It does have some good fits. First of all, it is going to be hardy statewide. We can say that pretty much. As you get into real high rainfall belts in the southeast, where you're up around 50 to 52 inches in a, quote, normal year, that might be actually a little too much water for it. And we don't actually find it distributed as much in the southeastern part of the state as the rest. But in the 15 to 30 inch to maybe 42 inch rainfall band, it's quite well suited. Full sun only. While you might find it creeping occasionally into the shade, it's best to keep it in full sun. It's not going to be as dense as Bermuda grass, and that was one of the problems that we saw 10 years ago. It was being billed and sold as giving you the quality of Bermuda, but with much less maintenance, and that's not true at all. Very heat tolerant, very drought tolerant, very low water use rate. I will say though, in a severe drought, you'll actually find it going brown before Bermuda grass, and that's part of its adaptive mechanism. We call that leaf firing. You fire your leaves so you no longer have the tissues present to evaporate that water, and that's part of the mechanism there. But unfortunately, as horticulturalists, we like to see things stay green. The grass has a different idea during a drought.
Okay. And as far as mowing, sometimes buffalo grass can be mowed a little bit taller than Bermuda.
Yes, and this is an issue. We have to bring in the idea of where you've got another grass that might invade it, because many people will be familiar out in the Woodward area where they'll look at native pastures grazed down to 1 inch and the buffalo grass is doing wonderfully, and they'll hear us in extension talking about mow your buffalo grass at 3 inches. The buffalo will be more resistant to Bermuda invasion if you keep the height up on it. But actually, buffalo grasses can tolerate mowing to 1 inch, or you can let them go on up to 6 or 8 inches. If it's a high rainfall year, they'll actually get to 6 or 8 inches in height. So you find the whole spectrum there. Folks that like to mow their buffalo short to the middle of the road, 3 inches, or maybe even let it go naturally to 6 to 8 inches. But we will say it will resist Bermuda invasion more if you'll leave the height cut up on it. Reduce the amount of watering and fertilize only very sparingly.
Okay. Well, anything else you'd like to tell us about buffalo grass?
They are available as seed and as sod. Your selection goes down if you want just simply sodded or plugged types. 609 and Prairie are about the only 2 sodded types you'll find in the state, but you have a number of different seeded types. Cody and Bowie typically are some of our best seeded turf type performers.
Okay, Cody and Bowie. All right, well, Dennis, over here we've got a patch of St. Augustine grass, and although it's not all that common in the northern part of the state, it is used a little bit down in the southern part of Oklahoma.
That's right. We see its use about as far north as Ada, but in Ardmore, Medill, Durant, Hugo, Idabel, there's quite a bit of its use, especially in shaded areas.
Okay, and it's best in the shaded areas and even in the southern part of the state, primarily for what reason, Dennis?
Well, it's an attractive grass, but also because it's more stress tolerant under hot conditions and better disease resistance than tall fescue is under those shaded conditions. That's why we see St. Augustine used successfully over those in shaded areas in those areas. And also because our winters have been very mild over the last decade, its use is actually expanding.
Okay. And St. Augustine is the widest bladed grass that we've
Right.
looked at today, and probably one of the more wider bladed grasses that we'll see, especially in Oklahoma, even though it's just the southern part of the state.
That's right, and it's a matter of personal preference. Some people like a wide blade and others like a very narrow blade.
To me, it has sort of a tropical look to it, but does spread by stolons, I guess, like Bermuda.
Yes, above ground runners, the stolons, and it can spread actually quite rapidly, and you can encourage it to spread in with more fertilizer and irrigation, and then kind of slow it down a little bit by holding back on those resources once you've got it where you want it.
Okay. And what, Dennis, are the keys to keeping a St. Augustine grass looking good?
Okay, try to use it mainly in the medium to lightly shaded areas. While in some parts of the state it can get by with winters in full sun, if we do get one of those really cold winters again, that will hit it in the full sun areas, and actually it's because it's not sheltered as much in the open areas. It has a mowing height adaptation of about 2 to 3 inches. It does require moderate to high amounts of fertilizer, irrigation during drought. It does have a few challenging problems such as take-all of St. Augustine, which would require an occasional fungicide treatment. It does get chinch bugs with some amount of regularity. Watering can help to reduce the impact of chinch bug. Also some insecticidal sprays can help with those. But winter kill probably is one of the greatest challenges, and we've been relieved of that, at least for a few years.
Yeah, it hasn't been that cold. And this patch here in Stillwater, you guys do some modifications.
That's
to keep it
right.
alive.
We modify the environment here. We like our students to be able to see what mature St. Augustine looks like, because some of them will go to work down on the Gulf Coastal Plain. So we regularly mulch this with either straw or pine needle mulch every year once December comes around.
Okay, so we cheat a little bit.
That's
And
right.
Down at the studio, we have a variegated St. Augustine that we sometimes put in our window boxes and hanging baskets and things like that.
Sure.
Little bit of a variation there. Well, Dennis, this is a very unique species of grass. I don't really recall seeing a lawn of this around Oklahoma, but there are a few. And what type of grass do we have here?
Okay, this is centipede grass, and it's adapted to Eastern Asia, Korean Peninsula, Japan, and also amazingly southern to actually north central Oklahoma. More in the eastern 2/3 of the state because of higher rainfall. It's not real water use efficient, that's its one drawback, but in terms of tolerating low fertility and infrequent mowing, it's great. It has a very light shade tolerance to it or full sun, and it is finer textured than St. Augustine. It's probably most often confused with St. Augustine.
Okay.
And we'll see this in the southeastern corner of the state most often because of warm conditions and also more rainfall.
Okay, and availability?
Availability, you cannot find it as sod available in Oklahoma, but you can buy it from Texas and Arkansas. And then seed is readily available over the internet of varieties such as Tiff Blair and also just common centipede variety not stated. We'd recommend the Tiff Blair variety as it has been proven through many years here in the Stillwater area.
Okay, well, with a name like centipede grass, I would imagine it's also one that's stoloniferous. Is that
Yes,
the case?
that's right. It crawls, and if you have a patch of it in your lawn, you want to try to spread it, you can spread it by either harvesting the sod or taking fairly sizable plugs of it.
Okay, great. Well, Dennis, as we move from turf grasses for the full sun areas to turf grasses for the shaded areas, we do have some choices there. And what would you say is the most common turf grass for shade in Oklahoma?
Well, tall fescue gets used most often in the shade in Oklahoma. Occasionally we'll see some perennial rye and Kentucky bluegrass as well, but I'd have to give the hands up to tall fescue for shade tolerance.
All right, and we've got a few patches right here, and the variety in this square is the Kentucky 31, and we see a lot of people sell this as a turf type of fescue, but it's really suited for something else.
It could be used as a turf in the broad sense. It's a general purpose soil stabilizer when you need a vegetation in the shade. It's not really a true turf type, but it was the first widely used tall fescue for turf purposes. But now we have some improved turf-type tall fescues, better color, texture, density, and we try to steer people towards their use unless it's a very, very low maintenance site.
Okay, and we've got a few patches of those different improved tall
That's
fescues.
right. I think you can see the improved color, texture, and density of types such as Hound Dog 5, Crossfire 2, Plantation, the Rebel series. All of those are good performers in light to medium shade.
Okay, these look a lot better, I think, than the Kentucky 31. And I think sometimes people may be a little bit confused when it says turf type tall fescue. I mean, they may be thinking, is this 12 inches tall or?
Well, the modern turf types are selected for lower growth habit, but there's no such thing as what we call a short fescue. It's just a common name that came over. But the turf types are better adapted for lawns unless you're trying to stabilize the ditch or the pond dam that's very moist and shady, and there probably Kentucky 31 would be a better choice.
Okay. Well, turf for shade is always going to be a little bit of a challenge.
It certainly will be.
And the tall fescues ideally would be suited for growing conditions a lot different than Oklahoma.
That's right. They are native to Northern Europe, British Isles, so they actually are better adapted to lower light levels, 40 to 60% of what we get, so that explains why they can work in the shade for us. But actually all grasses like full sun better than shade. Management-wise, though, as we move them into full sun, they do require more water, and most people are not willing to add more water, or actually that's not even good environmental stewardship to place something that's high water use rate out in full sun. But they work best where the air movement is best and where they can get adequate light. So tall fescues are always going to be challenged because of either severe drought, restricted air movement, which leads to worse disease pressure, and just long-term dogged hot summers.
Okay, and that restricted air movement, a lot of people, we put this in our backyard, a lot of us have privacy fences, it's just kind of some strikes against the plant.
That's right. The privacy fence, while giving us privacy, also reduces air movement and it causes a shading effect, and both of those are detrimental to tall fescue.
Okay, we can grow it there, it just makes it a little bit tougher.
Right, we're forced into using tall fescue, so to speak, in the shade.
Okay, well what are some of the maintenance things we need to keep in mind with our tall fescue?
Maintenance items, let's never fertilize it in the summer. So that period, June through August, we should not be fertilizing it. We need to make sure that it's not been wilted for 2 to 3 days at a time because it doesn't have very good drought hardiness. It does benefit from fertilizations in the fall because the cool season grasses tiller more and they increase their density. So at the time when many people think about putting up the mower, actually it's very beneficial to continue to mow it and encourage tillering or branching of the mother plants so that you get good density to it.
Okay, all right, anything else?
I believe that's all.
Okay, well I got 2 more turf grasses that we're going to take a look at, and they're in another part of our research station here. Well, Dennis, even though we're out in a sunny spot here on the station, we're standing in a varietal trial of perennial rye, and it is a choice for the shade. And what are some of the advantages and disadvantages to having perennial rye as a turf grass for a shaded area?
Okay, the advantage is that it is green year-round. It does have some amount of shade tolerance, a little better than Bermuda grass. And it's aggressive from seed in that it establishes quickly initially. Disadvantages are that if it is damaged by disease or wear, it's slow to recuperate, slow to respread into those areas.
And it's not really a spreading grass at all.
That's right. True bunch type growth habit has neither above ground or below ground creeping stems.
Okay, so perennial ryegrass, very, very shiny as we look at the,
yes,
the
and
leaf
beautiful
blades
dark green, I might add.
Okay, and as we move over here, we're into another type of turf that can be grown in the shade. What have we got here, Dennis?
Okay, this is Kentucky bluegrass. And while we would not recommend 100% stand of it for a shade grass, it is beneficial to mix it with tall fescue at about 5 to 10% by weight. And the reason for that is it does have rhizomes or below ground stems that allow it to fill into damaged areas. So it's beneficial to mix it with tall fescue.
Okay, I've always been able to tell the bluegrass because of the boat-shaped leaf blades. That's one little identifying characteristic. Sort of looks like a little canoe there on the end.
Yeah, the keel on a boat.
Okay, but it does have a little bit of a blue color, and again, one of those turf species that can be used in the shade. But Dennis, with the problems or the challenges associated with getting a stand of turf established in a shaded area, it would seem that there would be something we could do to kind of help our cause. So what would you recommend as far as a type of turf for a shaded area?
Well, most often it is going to be the tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass mix. Also, beneficial practices include a little bit of pruning of the trees, sparing moisture, not over-fertilizing, of course, during the summer.
Okay, and again, that blend, that diversity is kind of one of the
That's right.
key elements.
That's right. Getting the Kentucky bluegrass in there at 5 to 10% by weight, because it does offer better resistance against brown patch disease. The tall fescue is more resistant to summer patch. So between the two of them, you've got much better chances by using that biodiverse mix.
Okay, all right. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for
My pleasure,
giving
Steve.
us this information.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.